welcome Eoin.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here on the cutting edge of technology because it's hard when I think if you're young now, it's hard to understand what the 1970s were like for us. It was really tough. We did not even have a remote control for the television. You had to get out of the sofa and press the button with your own finger. And I remember my cousin calling from Liverpool and saying, "We got this thing. You just pointed at the television and the channel changes, called a remote control." And we thought this was magical. And because we didn't have remote controls in Ireland, we made my little brother lie on the floor with his finger on the button, and then we would just throw things at his head. And the deal was if it connected, he had to change, and if it missed, he got a pass. And I tried to explain cassette tapes to a teenager recently at a talk, because cassette tapes were what we had, and trying to explain that to someone who dreams is almost impossible. I was saying to him, okay, so you listen to 6 songs and then you turn over. And he said, well, why would I turn over? I said, you don't turn over, you fool. You turn the tape over, but make sure you have a pencil. He said, what do I need a pencil for? Well, sometimes the machine eats the tape. You got to wind it back in. And at that point, he just said, shut up, Gandalf. You're making this up. So it was a very different time, a dark, dark time.
Before we talk about Highfire, I want to go back to the days before you were an author. First of all, did you have a typewriter then, or did you actually have a computer?
I didn't have either. I had a pad and paper. So I wrote 6 books just on my spiral notepads. And then I got a computer. And maybe some of you remember these. Do you remember the fancy Apple laptops that had a handle, and they weighed about like 15 kilos, and they were kind of bright blue, and I thought that was unbelievable. But it took a long time before my typing caught up with my brain, so it was easier for me just to write by hand. But now, I type everything now.
Interesting. Can you talk a little bit about, you've been an author now for 20 years, but like, how did this get started? Like, what was your break initially?
I started, I think, I was very lucky in my family. My dad was a historian and a writer, a doctor of history, and my mom was a drama teacher. And so back in the late 60s, 68, I learned to read in the best possible way. And this was when my mom was learning her lines for the play, I would do all the other lines. So I would sit on my mom's bed and she would do her lines, and then I would read back to her. And I think that's possibly the best way to learn how to read in the history of mankind. And I remember going to school on my first day in school and being outraged that nobody else can read. I was like, who are these idiots coming in here at 4 years of age and they can't read? But of course, everybody caught up by the second week. But if you have young kids, or if you're planning to have young kids, well, obviously if you're having kids, they will be young. So if you're planning to have kids, the advantage that they have if they can read going to school is unbelievable, and it's an advantage that they will always have. So I would highly recommend trying something to get them to read.
Interesting. And coming back actually from when you first started writing, your big break was Artemis Fowl.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
That was in 2000. I'd had 6 books published in Ireland, and they were very successful in Ireland, and Denmark, and that was it. So for some reason, people in Denmark really liked me. But then I went to Denmark, and no one showed up, so who knows? But then I wrote Artemis Fowl, and my wife, who was my first reader, Jackie, she just said to me, it was like beyond compliments. She said, right, you need to get an agent. And for a writer, I nearly started crying. That's the nicest thing anyone ever said to me. You need an agent now. And so I got an agent, and it happened really quickly. I started getting all these phone calls. We've sold the English rights, we sold the American rights, Canadian and everything. And I remember I was teacher in elementary school, and I was doing yard duty or recess duty, I don't know what you call it here, where you have to monitor the kids in the playground. And I was on the infant yard, so it was like just bodily fluids everywhere of all types, and nobody wants the infant yard. And my principal came out and he said, okay, I'm going to take your yard duty. There's a phone call for you. And I thought, oh my God, my parents are dead. That's the only reason my principal would take my art duty. But it wasn't. I went in and there was, like, Disney was on the phone and they said, we just want you to know we put in a bid for your for the film rights. This is very surreal. You know, if you have to remember that when I was writing these books, I was writing them in the baby's bedroom, little box room, and only when the baby was not in there. So he had first call on the room, and then me. And to go from that to getting a phone call from the head of the Disney studio when you're teaching in the infant yard, it's very surreal. But then it took off very quickly, and I gave up teaching, and I haven't really stopped touring since.
It's a very fun job. You get to come visit places like this and talk.
Yeah,
to people about
it's fantastic. I mean, I don't enjoy the actual airports. I mean, I think there was a time when airports were very glamorous, and like people just walked around smoking. It was great, but now it's not like that. I'm kidding about smoking. Actually, I don't like smoking, but they were nicer places. But now I spend half my time in airports, and you get a bit tired of that. But this is fantastic. It's worth it for this.
Yeah. When did you find out that Artemis Fowl is going to become a movie?
Quite quickly, they actually bought the movie rights before the book came out from the first draft, which was amazing to me. And in my naivete, in 2000, I thought, well, the movie's going to be out in 2001, and then I'm just going to I'm going to go live in the Chateau Marmont. It's all going to be great to just be me and Jim Sheridan and Bono will be fantastic. But obviously, it's still not out, but it's coming out in May. But it's been I had totally dismissed that. I thought that's never going to happen. It's been 20 years. Let's forget about that. And as soon as I stopped worrying about it, it seemed to happen very quickly. So yeah, it's quite exciting, and it's a good team. So we'll see.
And you're actually featured in the movie?
I don't know if they're going to use that because it was a bad day for them. All I had to do was walk across a field. And Kenneth Branagh said to me, he said, "Oh, and there's nothing difficult, just walk across the field. And all I would say to you is don't look at the camera." And I was staring into the black soul of that camera the whole time. And every time I moved my head, there was another camera. So eventually they said, "Listen, we're just going to scan you just in case. That we probably won't use your avatar, but we might just..." So I feel like it's not going to be me. It's going to be like a 20 years younger version of me up there. But we'll see. It was fun.
Good. Have you had a chance to see a preview of the movie or the movie at all?
I think I'm seeing it next week. I just got an email from Disney, so I think they're setting up something when I get home with the star, a guy called Ferdia who plays Artemis. So I think we're going to see it next week, which will be interesting.
Are you excited? This is like the first time where they're going to take the written word and actually convert it to an actual set, where you actually get to see kind of their visualization of the same.
It's exciting and it's a bit nerve-wracking, but I don't feel very connected to it because it's such a big thing, and the creative process for me is very small and personal, and this is very big and public. So there's a huge disconnect between me and that. But it's lovely to be a guest and turn up and everybody is nice to you and then go home. But I don't know if I could work. It just takes so much organization. You have to be a very special kind of person to be on top of all that. But yeah, I am worried. One of the things that happened was they cast Judi Dench and they like gender flipped the part and made it quite a bit older. So I wasn't worried about the gender flipping, but that particular part has a lot of fighting and running and stuff. And I thought, I don't know if that's going to work, but they sent me a video of Judi Dench, and she's in Irish accent, and she said to somebody, "Top of the morning," and it was the most aggressive use of that phrase that I ever heard. And I thought, this is amazing. She's fantastic. So I've never been scared by a fairy, by anyone saying "top of the morning" to me before. So that was good.
That's awesome. All right, so coming back to Highfire, this is your first book with Harper, is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, well, no. Yeah, it is my first adult book with HarperCollins, yeah.
Now, I'd love to know kind of how you come up with the premise. And when you told them the premise of it, I don't know, if I was in the room,
yeah,
it's got a very unique premise and a unique sense of style. Can you talk a little bit about how that came around?
I had been writing about leprechauns for 20 years, and I thought it's time to grow up and write something more mature like dragons. So I had this idea, I wanted to write a dragon book, but what I do with all my books is I'm very much a genre fiction guy, and so I go into that genre and I try and say, well, what can I do that's different? Because the reason I'm in that genre is because I love it, but also because it's already been amazingly done. So if I'm going to do a dragon book, there's no point doing Smaug or, Game of Thrones dragon, because that's been done amazingly well. I'm not going to do it better, so I might as well do something very different. So my idea, what I try and do is stress test the idea, and the idea is that there's a dragon alive. And I ask myself, well, if that is true, if you take that as true, how is that possible? And as far as I could see, there were two ways. The first way would be if the dragon lived somewhere incredibly remote, maybe in the rainforest of South America, where he could just hide forever. Great. But if then you give your dragon a personality where he likes Netflix, he likes martinis, he likes some conversation in the evening, he can't go there. He has to go somewhere that has a little bit of civilization, but not too much. And what happens if he's seen? Well, if he's seen, he's done for, unless there is an existing legend there that he can piggyback on that legend. So I was initially going to set it in Loch Ness, so he could, if anyone saw him, they would just think, oh, it's Nessie. And then when they went back to the bar, no one would believe them, because people come back to the bar every day and say they've seen the monster. But I just thought that wasn't right. There wasn't enough civilization there. And then I found one of your fine legends, which is the Honey Island monster. Is there anyone from Louisiana here by any chance? No? One guy, have you heard that legend? No? Shame on you, sir. Go on for your own mythology. Well, you're not going to believe this, mostly because it's not true, but there are certain bits of this that are true, and then it goes into the area of legendary, and I think you'll see exactly where that happens. One, in the 1940s, I think it was, a circus train jumped the bridge and crashed into the Pearl River. That's true. A gorilla escaped from the circus train. That's true. Now, what probably happened to that gorilla was the alligators ate the gorilla. That's probably what happened. But the legend says that the alligator lady was about to eat the gorilla, but then they looked into each other's eyes and they fell in love, and they got married in a swamp wedding, and they had a little gorilla gator. And that's probably not true. And that's when that gorilla gator grew up, he became the Honey Island monster, and he roams the swamp and the bayou, like I suppose, like a tropical Bigfoot. And I thought, this is perfect, because my dragon would look a bit like that. And if anyone saw Vern, they would just say, oh, it's the Honey Island monster, and he would get a pass. So he hangs out in the bayou. He watches a lot of Netflix. He has a little shack, which he set up with a dish. He has a little beer fridge, which is full of vodka. And he has a guy who kind of is his familiar. And it's okay, like he's not happy because he has no life companion, but he's gotten used to it, and he passes the days until one day this 15-year-old Cajun boy runs into them. And initially Vern is going to kill Squib, but then he finds out actually this kid could be useful. And in the time-honored tradition of buddy movies, they become inseparable, a 3,000-year-old dragon and a 15-year-old boy. So yeah, I think I'd be very surprised if I don't get the Pulitzer Prize. That's all I'm saying.
When I first started reading the book, I loved it, mainly because as someone that practices meditation occasionally and tries to eat low carb and enjoys Netflix as well, has to give up beer for vodka.
You don't. It's like the unexpected. You don't expect a dragon to be talking about the ketogenic diet. It's just not. You have never heard that before, and that's what I want you to be surprised by that kind of thing. And the master of that was Terry Pratchett. Has anyone read Terry Pratchett? The Discworld books, loads of people, and he was fantastic at that. He would, like, the Grim Reaper was one of his characters. Who looked very traditionally like the Grim Reaper, a skeleton in a long monk-like robe with a hood up. But he was always saying things like, "Oh, I'd love a curry right now," and that you don't expect the Grim Reaper to say that, and that in itself is funny. And I wanted Vern to be like that. You're not expecting him to say the things he does or to like the things he does, or why is he wearing a Flashdance t-shirt? That's another thing, and it's just he's very humanized for a dragon.
Got it. What's it been like to actually write for adults?
Yeah.
Other than just having to put a few naughty words here and there.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be great. I had written kids' books for 20 years, so no swearing, not really much violence. So in my mind, this book was going to be one long expletive and just with so much violence packed into it. I was going to have a great fun. And then my mother visited. And now my mother is great, and she's quite a libertarian, and she had a poetry and a women's group, but it doesn't matter. She's still my mom, so I don't want her to think less of me. So she came into the house and she said, what are you working on? I said, well, I'm doing an adult book about a dragon. And she said, wow, that sounds fantastic. Me and my women's group will definitely pick that for our book of the month. And the whole thing changed, and I had to go back through it and take out a lot of the swearing. So that's the literary reason that there's not so much swearing in it. But there is quite a bit. But the problem is, this is the first time I've done an event where no kids are here. Usually, because of the Artemis Fowl books, it's half kids. And so when it comes to the reading, I have to substitute another word for all the swearing, and the word that's been picked is sparkles. So you're a total sparkle head. I will sparkle you up. It's been great. It's actually funnier than swearing. So that's worked really well. But no, I really enjoyed it. I think though people have this conception that if you're writing for kids and then you change it up for adults, that your brain has to work harder. But the truth is, if you know any 12-year-olds, or some of you are young enough to actually remember being 12 quite vividly, those people are so smart. Like, they are so sharp. Like, they are definitely sharper than some of my age. And they just don't have a license to do things. But they get very frustrated when someone comes into the classroom and starts doing a sing-song voice and speaking down to them. And if kids are 12 and you treat them like they're 10, they're hugely insulted by that. And they can really tell the difference between someone who's 12 and someone who's 10. And there's a real cutoff point where one day they're playing with Barney, and the next day they're wearing eyeliner and listen to The Cure. It's just totally changes very quickly. And you have to be on that and see when that's happening. So I've always tried to ride up to kids. So really, to do an adult book, it's not that different. And as you can hear from the plot of that, it could very easily be a kid's book if you just took out even a little bit more swearing and there wasn't so much gruesome violence and drugs. But other than that, it's different.
So you've written dozens of books over 20 years. How have you stayed productive? Did you not take 1 year off saying, you know what, I got writer's block here, just cannot do it?
Well, as we were saying earlier, I get writer's block for every book. About 2/3 of the way in, I just have this huge self-doubt chasm open up underneath me, and I feel, well, this is a dragon. There's a dragon living in Louisiana. When did this sound like, actually saying it now, it doesn't sound like a great idea, but when did this sound like a good idea? And that just grabs hold of me for about a month. And I don't really try, I used to try and get around it, but now I just accept it. This is, okay, I'm gonna have this doubt for a month. So what will I do for that month? I'm going to work on another project. And eventually it just clears itself because your subconscious is working out the answer. And when it's ready, it will just pop it up there and you will keep going. And also, I've always tried to switch it up between books. So if I do an Artemis Fowl book, then the next I might do a play after that, or I might do a picture book, or I might do a graphic novel. So every project is a different project. I never do two the same in a row, which my editor, I suppose, career-wise, that's not the best move, but just for me personally, to keep me interested, I have to mix it up all the time.
Okay. I want to ask about the mechanics of joking,
Yeah.
of the jokes you put in. I can see how someone can sit down and come up with story after story, but making jokes, to me it seems like it's a black magic.
Yeah.
How do you actually sit down and, like, book after book, get the right amount of humor? And it's a very unique type of humor that you put in.
It's very dark humor, I think, and you have to find that line between darkly funny but then stupid. If it goes over that line, people don't care about the story anymore. So you have to find that level. And very often I do go over the line and my editor says, no, we have to pull back a little bit here. This is not the time for this. You're actually ruining your own narrative by putting in 5 or 6 jokes. But I do like to do stuff, if you're in an office on your own, and a lot of you guys will understand this because you probably are in an office on your own, your mind just goes off in strange places. And when I was writing the Artemis Fowl books, I had this fantasy scenario in my head where parents had had a long day at work and they come home and they're really tired and they just want to sit down, and watch the football or watch the news or whatever it is they want to watch. And then suddenly it's bedtime for the kids and it's their turn to tell the story. And they don't want to tell the story because they're tired, but they do. And so they grudgingly go up to the room and they read a chapter of an Artemis Fowl book. And so I want to punish them for being grudging about that. So I put in a joke for parents. And this takes a lot of thought. This is what I want to do. I want to put in a joke for the parents that will make the parents laugh, but it's totally unsuitable for the children. And when the parents laugh, the child goes, "What's funny about that, Dad?" And then they have to explain that joke 4 years before developmentally appropriate for the child. Now that is a very complicated thought to have, but when I do it, I think, well, this is never going to happen, but it keeps me laughing. But this particular one, which was one of my favorites, did work, and I've had several mums and dads come up to me and grudgingly congratulate me. And one guy had the perfect response to the joke, and the joke was this. There's a chapter about a dwarf in The Last Guardian, and the dwarf's name is Colin. So nothing strange or weird about that. The dad is reading the story. Colin did this, Colin did that. Colin burrowed down a deep, dark, smelly hole, as dwarves do. Great. But what Dad does not know is that Colin's second name is Oscopy. Okay, so thank you, someone's ahead of me. So he's reading the story, he turns the page, and he says, and then out of the deep, dark, smelly tunnel came colonoscopy. And he starts to laugh, and the child goes, Dad, what's funny about colonoscopy? And then the dad has to tell him. So this dad came up to me and went, "Oh yeah, colonoscopy, thanks very much." And I said, "What?" "What happened?" He said, "Well, my son says to me, yeah, Daddy, what's so funny about colonoscopy? He's only 7 years old." And I said, "Well, what did you say?" And he said this, which I think was the best line. The son says, "What's funny about colonoscopy?" And the dad says, "Son, there's nothing funny about colonoscopy." And I said, "Well done, Dad. That was the best comeback ever." So that's the kind of weird stuff that keeps me entertained in my own office. What you have to remember is that all you guys, I am sure, have heard from your parents and your bosses at some point in your lives, okay, you're an adult now. It's time to grow up. It's time to focus. It's time to, do adult things. I am told, don't grow up. Think about leprechauns. Think about fairies. Keep yourself in that childish mind space. And it's fantastic. I can kind of stay in touch with that part of me that will come up with all these fart jokes. And I get paid for that. So yeah, it's a really privileged position to be in.
Do you test your jokes on your family, on your wife?
No, God, no. My kids do not think I'm funny at all. My wife is great. She told me years ago, because we're together since we were 17, and she said to me, I suppose when I started writing my first book, I was about 21, And she said, "You are never to put me in one of your books. I'm warning you now, I'm a private person. Don't put me in the books." So she's the only one who's not in the books. But then when I wrote the first Artemis Fowl book, the scenario was this. Artemis Fowl's dad goes missing, and his mother is so in love that she has a nervous breakdown. And I wasn't sure if that would hold up. So I said to Jackie, I said, "Sweetie, I want to ask you, I'm not going to put you in the books, but I just want to ask you, a question about a scenario." And she said, "Go on." And I said, "Okay, there's a married couple, and wait, let me personalize it. If I was to go missing, would you have a nervous breakdown?" And Jackie said to me, "Would you be taking the car?" And so I think that means no, but I'm not sure.
Writing for 20 years, I want to know if the internet has changed kind of the way you write.
Yeah.
Because now you've got Twitter and you can go in and interact with your fans.
I try not to interact when I'm working on something. Like people on Twitter I have Instagram, which is linked to Twitter, but I don't use Twitter or Facebook because they've turned a bit nasty. But Instagram so far is nice. Although kids, when you have kids coming on, they will tell you straight to your face, what they think about you. And that can be really nice, or it can be like terrible. Like this kid came over to visit my son recently. And look, I'd never met this kid before. He just strutted into the house, looked around, and very judgy. And then he looked at me and he said, "Oh, the man who wrote the Artemis Fowl books." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, the first 3 were good, but after that, boom." Like, no problem. And so you just learn to take that from kids. They're very, very, very honest. And again, that can be nice, but it can also be terrible. Internet is great for research. I haven't been to Louisiana, so I had to do a lot of research online. And luckily, there are several tours that the Louisiana guy should go. He's gone. He's not there. You should go on one of these tours if you are even from Louisiana, sir. And they go upriver looking for the Honey Island monster, and they record the whole thing. So you've got hundreds of hours of these guys, and they're so helpful because they point out the plants, the fish. They just tell you everything you need to know, and in the right vernacular. So most of the dialogue is cribbed from these videos, and then I put it together like a jigsaw.
Where does your inspiration come from a lot of these? Do you take your friends, do you take some of the students, do you take people that you know and put them in there?
I do. I take everybody I know has been actually recycled several times. The Fowl twins are my own sons. Artemis Fowl is my brother Donal. And that was just from a photo. I saw a photo of Donal making this Holy Communion. And in Ireland in the 70s and 80s, when you made your first Holy Communion, you had to wear a proper suit, the boys. And the girls wore it was like a wedding dress, like a white wedding dress. If you went to this and you didn't know what was happening, it looked like the weirdest arranged marriages ever of 7-year-old children. And I saw Donal, and he was wearing a Roger Moore double-breasted check suit, and he had an impish smile. And I thought to myself, he looks like a James Bond bad guy. And that is a great character. A James Bond bad guy who's like 10. So I put that away, and I kept it for many years until I came up with the Fairy Gold story, and so I put the two ideas together. And then all the other fairies are all my family and friends. As I said, the twins are Finn and Sean, my kids, who are very, very different. And then Vern, I'm not sure who Vern is. It's probably a mixture of a lot of adult friends I have. And Squib, if I'm honest, I'd say Squib is kind of he's a spiritual descendant of Huckleberry Finn, which I've always loved. Because I feel he's like Huck. He's out on the river in his raft or in his boat trying to make a few bucks. And that's what Huckleberry Finn used to do. So yeah, he would be and my son is called Finn after Huckleberry Finn. So he was a very critical. That was a real critical book for me when I read that, because I didn't like Tom Sawyer much, because he was like the smart ass that we've all had, like the guy who's on all the sports teams, and it's just everybody loves him, and I just didn't like that guy. But Huck Finn, I felt, was not perfect. He didn't like going to church. He didn't like wearing shoes. His best friend was a slave, which was like, at the time, that was unbelievable. To take what is usually a marginalized character and make him a main character, a positive character. That was a wonderful thing to do, I think. So, yeah, Huck Finn was a huge influence on me.
Interesting.
So I'd like to ask about another book of yours. When you were writing And Another Thing, what was it like to sort of comb through Douglas Adams's notes and put your own thoughts into them and combine it all into a book?
I didn't have any notes. There was no notes. Or they had a few notes, but I didn't want them because I asked my agent to read them, and I said, are they at all comprehensible? And she said, no, they're just like little bits of thoughts. There's nothing there. I said, well, then just keep it, because that will just, if I try and follow that, it will confuse me. So I just did it myself. It was quite daunting to do that, and I thought very seriously about it, and I still don't know if that was the right thing to do. I think it's a good book, but I just don't know, was it the right thing to do? And I got really stuck when I started off. And there were two things helped me through. And one was I was in my office with my beautiful laptop with the handle. And this was the infancy of Facebook, when it wasn't so targeted. So I was on Facebook at the time. And I was checking my whatever. And at the side of Facebook, none of you guys remember this, but at the side there was just random clubs you could join or support that would pop up. And one day a club came up to stop me writing the Hitchhiker's Guide sequel. And I thought, that's terrible. I mean, that's not even aimed at me, that's aimed at the world, and I just happened to be in the world. So I joined that club. And just to see what was going on, you know, and initially I was defending myself. I was like, come on, guys, give me a chance, I'm a nice guy. And it just sounded a bit lame. So I went the other way and started insulting myself very creatively. And what I realized was that it means nothing. It doesn't mean anything. People just write stuff that they don't even really think about. So that helped me a little bit. But what really helped me is my wife again. There's one character in The Hitchhiker's Guide you may be familiar with called Zaphod Beeblebrox, who has the two-headed head of the president of the galaxy. And I wanted to take off one of the heads. And usually when I say that, there's like a from the Hitchhiker fans, because they are shocked that you would do that. The worst, I closed out WorldCon last year, and I made a Star Wars, Star Trek joke, and there was people actually coming up on the stage to beat me. So sometimes you just have to know when to make a joke, and that was not it. But anyway, so I went into my house to Jackie, and I said, Jackie's like, what is wrong with you? You've been moping around all day. And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you this now. It's very important, so just concentrate. I said, there's a fictitious alien with two heads. I'm going to take off one of those heads. And I'm very worried that some people that I will never meet might be a little bit upset. And my wife looked at me and said something very wise. She said, well, I have to pick up the kids. And now if you think about that, what that means is, why don't you get yourself an actual problem? So that really helped me through that. And I've done it a few times where I've taken on other people's work. I did a Doctor Who novella. Do you have any Doctor Who fans? Not too many, thank God, okay. And I thought it would be hilarious. They came to me and they said, will you do one of the Doctor Who's? And I said, well, who's doing the other ones? And they said, well, Neil Gaiman. I said, stop, I'm in. But I thought it would be hilarious to do a Doctor Who novella, having never watched an episode of Doctor Who. And to this day, I have never watched an episode of Doctor Who. So I thought, I have some incidental knowledge that I garnered from walking through the sitting room when the TV was on. So I will use that. And it was terrible. It was embarrassing. And it was a nice story, but it wasn't Doctor Who. And a friend of mine who does the best backhanded compliments ever, because he's so nice, but he still wants to get his point across. And he's a big Doctor Who fan. So he said to me, you know that Doctor Who book you wrote? And I said, yeah. He said, that was the best Star Trek story I ever read. And I know what he's saying. All I did was I took Captain Kirk and, put him in a long coat and he became Doctor Who. So I think if you're going to do something like that, you really have to give it its proper due and do it properly. So when I did the Iron Man book, I put a lot of research into that. And I remember Marvel saying to me, we went to see Marvel, and they said, now, this is not Robert Downey Jr., because movies are very separate from the books. So this is the comic book Iron Man. It's not Robert Downey Jr. And I went, oh, okay, it's not Robert Downey Jr., but it's like completely Robert Downey Jr. So if you ever read that book, totally visualize Robert Downey Jr. in the part. But I had to say it wasn't. So there you go.
As a kid, I read a lot of Artemis Fowl books, and I was a fan of them. But like that, along with a lot of other sort of series that were aimed at young adults, like I guess, aged out of the demographic, but I know some of these series have, they keep going, and then I guess they get, new readers who are younger. And I was just sort of curious about if you think, if you have any feelings about like, with long-running series aimed at a certain age demographic, if like, if you're going to keep getting new readers in and sort of losing some others, or if like...
You do to a certain extent, but what happens is kids don't want to read the same books that their parents read. Like that's your dad's thing. So you want a new thing for you. So it's unavoidable that when you write for kids, as the series progresses, if the characters don't age up, that you're going to lose a lot of people. And my characters, they aged up a little bit, but not like we say Harry Potter, which was very even, and you could read the books in order, and you would be getting older as the characters were getting older to the point where they were all in relationships at the end of it. But my characters never really did that. It was all prepubescent, which is a great way of avoiding that minefield. You just write a lovely adventure story, and there's no boyfriend, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. It's just all adventure and fun. But the price you pay for that then is you do lose your readers. Now, I was lucky in that I managed to hold on to quite a few, and a lot of it went through to adulthood, so it was okay. But yeah, that does happen. It's just unavoidable. But the good thing about kids is they will read 8 books in a week. They will, if they like us, if they get the first one and they like it, they just want all the books, and they will read them all in a couple of weeks. So whereas we don't really have time to do that as adults.
Hi. I had a question about when you were starting to write. How did you balance writing with being a parent and your teaching career and everything?
Yeah, it was really difficult. And actually, if Artemis hadn't made it when it did, I was going to have to give up for a few years because we had a baby, and I had a job. My wife had opened a new business, and like writing was the only thing that wasn't really totally necessary at that time. It was like a hobby for me. And I had written a few books, and they had done okay, but it was really just from my own self-esteem that I was like a writer with published books. I wasn't really bringing any money home. So it was getting to the point where I was quite stressed. And we had to talk about it, and I said, well, right, if this last book doesn't get a deal, I'm going to have to just back off it for a few years until Finn is a bit older. But luckily, that was the book that got the deal. But it is so difficult. I mean, if you have a baby and a job, that's your life. And then if you want to sleep on top of that, it's not really, it's really tough. And I think the lack of sleep is the hardest thing. If you have a baby that, doesn't sleep very well, you're not sleeping very well. And then you have to go into work as well. It's really hard. I think that, I don't know if I would do it now. Knowing I wouldn't be able to do it now, I wouldn't have the energy. So yeah, are you in that situation?
Not exactly. I try and write on the side, but not very seriously.
Yeah.
It's hard to have the motivation, I think, after working.
Yeah, especially in this hellhole. No, I'm kidding. No, but yeah, it is. But, a couple of years, you'll get your life back a little bit. And well, I say a couple, 25. Get down to writing then.
All right, thank you.
All right, since we are here at Google, technology company, I have a tech question. So you mentioned you used pen and paper
Yeah,
initially. Then you started using Mac
yeah.
or whatever computers. And today there are a lot of voice recognition technologies and so on. Have you ever tried something like that, just to dictate?
The voice recognition, I have tried it. I don't feel comfortable doing it. I think I will have to probably move more into that as I get older because I just can't look at a screen for 8 hours a day anymore without getting a headache. So I definitely, I'm going to wait till it gets a bit better probably. But it's pretty good now, I think, isn't it? It's just I feel very self-conscious to it.
You have proper people here, so you can tell us what's wrong with it. And
Well, it's not attuned to the Wexford accent is the problem, I think. My accent is the worst accent since Tom Cruise in Far and Away, which was, but I did a talk once with Roddy Doyle, Booker Prize winner, and Colin Farrell, Sexy Man. And the three of us were on stage, and I was last to speak. I was closing it out. It was for Amnesty in New York. It was an Irish thing, and so I spoke last, and the lady put up her hand, and she said, "Well, I thought that Roddy's accent and Colin's accent were excellent, but your Irish accent is not very good." So obviously she thought we were acting. But so I think I tend to, if you listen to me speak, it's all but, so, but, and. So you would have to train yourself not to do that. So I will do it, but it'll probably take time.
thank you.
You're welcome. So I could just ask for any technological advance I want. Yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you so much for coming to Google. My question is actually very related to Vlad. I was wondering about the writing style that you have with pen and paper or computer versus some voice recognition, because I think there'll be very different approaches. In one of them, you might type and you're like enjoying every single scene, how it's created and how the story flows. You may have something where you're jumping from one thing to another one and you're thinking, oh, this, and then it's going to be followed by that, and you jump fast and then you fill in the blanks, versus kind of like just spitting out a whole bunch of ideas in voice recognition and then going back and brushing up and retouching. So how do you approach things?
Okay, you have to remember that I usually speak to kids and they ask me questions like, do you like snowmen? So this is very different. I do like snowmen, and but having listened to you guys today, I like the idea of just having two different types of work going on. So you're typing and then you have an idea for a future project. So you just hit your voice recognition thing and you just, do a little file, have that going, but you stay focused on your main idea. So yeah, I might give that a try.
Live right now. Thank you, Jet, for doing that.
You see, now you can see you can see it there. Look, yeah. It's just oh yeah. Whatever. Will that just say exactly? Is someone typing that, or is that a program?
It's a program.
Can you swear? Is there swearing? Sparkle, sparkle, sparkle. Squaring. I could stay here all day now just doing that. So yeah, that looks good.
Yeah.
That I don't know why that photo though. It looks like I'm trying on my father's tuxedo, and someone caught me, and I'm trying to brazen it out.
I know you mentioned earlier about how in the writing process for your books, you took long breaks when you felt like you had spent too much time on it, or you needed to back off from the idea for a while.
Yeah.
So this is a 2-for-1. How long ago would you say you started the writing process for Highfire specifically?
Yeah.
And then 2, how do you juggle / hold on to those ideas over such like broad periods of time? Because I mean, I'm a forgetful person in general. So every time I forget about an idea for 5 minutes, it's out the window.
It's gone. Yeah, that's very true. Highfire would have started about 2.5 years ago. And the way I work is in the morning I do my A project, which is my novel, that I'm actually in the middle of. And then in the afternoon I would do my B project, which is my notes for my upcoming novel. So while I was doing the Fowl twins, I was doing this in the afternoons. So by the time I got to that, it was a very smooth transition. I don't like taking a couple of weeks off. But the way I've changed my writing in the last few years is that I used to think of a scene and be very excited by that scene. And then I would make a few notes on that and then leave it until I got to that point in the book. But I found that if you attack the scene straight away, when you're still really excited about it, it turns out as a much better scene. And it is worth it being a bit disjointed because you can always go back and smooth that out. But I suppose the extra energy and brio there is in a scene that's coming to you right now is really great, and it's worth doing out of sync. And sometimes these scenes I have to do because and I learned this lesson recently. It was hammered home to me. My agent or my publisher sent me an image for the Fowl Twins #2, and it was like the two guys jumping into this volcano, and I said, "That's beautiful. You know, what's that?" And she said, "Well, that's the cover." I said, "Well, why is that the cover?" And she said, "Because you told me about 8 months ago that one of the main scenes was when they were jumping into the volcano." And I said, "Oh, yeah. I have no idea when I said that, what I was thinking when I said it. So now I have to think of a volcano scene, or I'm going to look like an idiot." It's a good idea to take notes, copious notes, but also if you have a really strong idea, go for that idea straight away and don't wait until it becomes stale in your mind.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out.
You're very welcome. Thank you guys for eating your lunch in front of me. That was really great.
When's your next Artemis Fowl book?
Well, there's no more Artemis Fowl, but there's the Fowl Twins, which is kind of his well, now they're the same age. So it is Artemis Fowl, really, but just I gave him
Is that out already?
Is a guy from Google asking me, is something available now? I cannot believe that. You should there it is. I have it. It's in my head. I beamed it directly into my head.
I use our product too much already. Like,
Yeah. You're taking a break. No, it is. The first one is out, and it's cleverly called The Fowl Twins. And the second one is coming next October. And there was an amazing scene in that featuring the boys jumping into a volcano. So that's something to watch out for.
Okay, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining. It's great to have you. Thank you.